You're watching All 24 News World News Program. Next up are the headlines. Tehran signals openness to an interim nuclear deal with Washington, just as the U.S. envoy warns Iran is weeks away from bomb-grade capability. Also coming up, deadly Pakistani airstrikes hit Afghanistan. Islamabad says it targeted gunmen camps, and Kabul promises to retaliate. In our news as well, explosions shake Kiev. Ukraine on maximum alert. Moscow repels Belgorod attack. And U.S. hopeful for war-ending proposals in 3 weeks. And EU warns of retaliation over U.S. tariffs. Brazil rejects new Cold War and calls for economic peace, while India-U.S. trade talks postponed pending legal review. Welcome back. First off in our news tonight, a senior Iranian official has told Reuters that Tehran will hold indirect talks with the United States in early March. The official said a temporary agreement could be possible despite ongoing disputes over sanctions, relief, and uranium enrichment levels. He added that American companies may take part as contractors in Iranian oil and gas fields, but Tehran rejects any attempt to grant foreign control over its oil and mineral resources. A senior U.S. official told Axios that Washington is ready to hold a new round of talks with Iran in Geneva this Friday, provided Tehran submits a detailed proposal for a nuclear agreement within the next 48 hours. The official said that if Iran presents a draft plan, American negotiators are prepared to begin a detailed discussion on the prospects for a new nuclear deal. He added that the Trump administration and Iran may also explore the possibility of an interim agreement ahead of a comprehensive settlement.
Really bad thing. What will that? I'm not going to talk to you about that.
Tehran has reaffirmed its commitment to diplomacy in the ongoing negotiations with Washington over the nuclear issue, stressing that any agreement must safeguard Iran's rights in peaceful nuclear energy. The message came during a phone call between Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi. Both sides reviewed the latest developments in the indirect talks between Tehran and Washington, stressing the importance of continued dialogue to advance negotiations and work toward a lasting understanding. U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, says Iran could obtain enough material for a nuclear bomb within a week, claiming Tehran is enriching uranium far beyond the needs of its nuclear program. In an interview with Fox News, Witkoff acknowledged the difficulty of persuading Tehran to reach an agreement. He added that Trump is surprised Iran continues to resist despite mounting pressure and the presence of U.S. naval power.
They've been enriching well beyond the number that you need for civil nuclear. It's up to 60%. They're probably a week away from having industrial grade bomb making material, and that's really dangerous.
Iran's military has renewed its warnings as U.S. forces continue to build up in the Middle East, stressing full readiness to confront any threat. Colonel Ali Johanshahi, commander of Iran's army ground forces, told Tasnim on Sunday that all enemy movements along the country's borders are being monitored continuously.
Our forces are at high level of readiness and are capable of neutralizing any threat at its inception. They monitor all enemy movements along the country's borders, moment by moment. The vigilance of our armed forces is the most important factor in deterring enemies' calculations by our enemies.
Moving on to a different news story, Hamas slammed U.S. Ambassador to the Zionist occupation Mike Huckabee, accusing him of reflecting the colonial mindset at the heart of the Zionist project. In a Saturday statement, the movement said Huckabee's remarks exposed blatant American support for hegemony and annexation, violating international law, disregarding the UN Charter, and trampling on regional sovereignty and the rights of local peoples.
Mike Huckabee's statements represent a clear embodiment of the colonial mentality upon which the Zionist movement was founded and reveal the extent of blatant American bias toward projects of domination and annexation in a flagrant violation of international law and the United Nations Charter, and in disregard for the sovereignty of regional countries and their people's rights. The U.S. ambassador's support for the geographic expansion of the Zionist entity and its occupation of the Arab and Islamic lands from the Nile to the Euphrates represents a direct threat to Arab and Islamic national security and serves as a warning that the Zionist project does not target Palestine alone, but also threatens the region's geography, identity, and stability.
For its part, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation condemned U.S. ambassador to the occupation statements, calling them dangerous, irresponsible, and a clear endorsement of the Zionist occupation's land grabs. In a Saturday statement, the OIC warned such extremist rhetoric fuels extremism and encourages occupation's illegal displacement, settlement expansion, and annexation, threatening regional security and stability.
The General Secretariat of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation condemns the dangerous and irresponsible statements made by the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, considering them an unacceptable call for Israel, the occupying power, to expand and seize more Palestinian and Arab lands based on false historical and ideological claims that violate the sovereignty of states, diplomatic norms, international law principles, as well as the United Nations Charter and its resolutions.
Still with the Middle East developments, a young Palestinian woman was killed Sunday by Israeli occupation forces in Beit Lahia, northern Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes continue across Gaza, hitting Rafah and Gaza City in the south and center. Gazans face their third Ramadan under the Zionist genocide, a reminder of the enclave's suffering. Families try to revive the spirit of past Ramadans, even with empty plates and stomachs. Zafar Jani has more.
In this maze of tents, destitute families are crammed together. Yet with the dignity that is uniquely theirs, these Palestinians are beginning yet another Ramadan under conditions that words can hardly describe. As Ra'id Hajjaj, the head of a family of 7, puts it, "We live like beggars, harsh words but deeply meaningful."
We are a family of 7. We receive only one food parcel every week, sometimes every 10 days if we are lucky enough to get it. We live like beggars, relying on soup kitchens, food aid, or even a simple piece of bread. Frankly, it is absolutely not enough.
Without homes or income, people in the Gaza Strip rely entirely on humanitarian aid and soup kitchens. Fasting is therefore not new to them, as famine has been tightening its grip for more than 2 years. As Ra'id Hajjaj's wife explains, hunger has become part of their daily life during Ramadan and beyond.
Ramadan has arrived, and I swear that tonight I shared half a box of cheese and a little fava bean with my children. We divided the cheese among us so that everyone could have a small portion.
With the continuing deterioration of the humanitarian situation, aid organizations are warning about the serious consequences of the ongoing restrictions on the entry of essential goods into the enclave imposed by the Zionist entity.
While 1.5 million people have lost their homes and are living under damaged tents, they are in urgent need for basic humanitarian assistance. Israel continues to restrict the entry of essential supplies across all humanitarian sectors: food, water, medical supplies, and hygiene products.
Since October 7, 2023, life in Gaza has worsened dramatically. The suffering of a population already subjected to decades of oppression has deepened, plunging them into greater despair. Successive Ramadans only reinforce this people's determination to endure adversity. While the entity has weapons and the support of the United States, the people of Gaza hold on to faith, a source of resilience admired by many around the world.
A Palestinian boy was killed and another wounded Saturday east of Nablus, the health ministry reported. On Sunday, Zionist occupation forces carried out raids across the West Bank, arresting at least 14 Palestinians, including children, in Nablus, Ramallah, Qalqaliyya and Al-Khalil. The Palestinian Prisoners Club said over 100 Palestinians have been detained since Ramadan began, with violence and settler attacks used to justify arrests and block worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Moroccan media reports said the kingdom has quietly funneled nearly $300 million to an Israeli military firm Elbit Systems to equip its armed forces with advanced fire and control systems for armored vehicles. The deal is raising eyebrows not just for the price tag. Elbit is the same company supplying weapons used by occupation forces in Gaza, providing surveillance tech for the separation wall in the West Bank, and building the electronic fence isolating occupied Al-Quds. And as you have followed in our headlines for tonight, Afghan authorities accused the Pakistani army of killing 25 civilians in an airstrike on a house in eastern Afghanistan. The Afghan Defense Ministry said dozens more, including women and children, were killed or injured in strikes on a religious school and homes in Nangarhar and Paktika provinces. Pakistan confirms it carried out airstrikes along the Afghan border, its most intense operation since October. The information minister says the targets were 7 camps and hideouts linked to the Pakistani Taliban in the ISIS branch in Khorasan. The strikes, he adds, were retaliation for attacks inside Pakistan planned in Afghanistan and carried out by Afghan nationals. For its part, Afghanistan says it will respond appropriately and measured to Pakistani airstrikes it calls a blatant violation of its sovereignty. The Defense Ministry condemns the attack as a breach of international law and good neighborly relations. In a statement, officials promised action but did not say when. Look in Eastern Europe now. Explosions rocked Kiev and other Ukrainian cities as air raid alerts warned of missile attacks, while drones struck targets in Russia, including near Moscow, the capital. The spike in violence comes amid cautious hopes for renewed talks between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky. Yasin reports now.
Explosions rocked Kyiv on Sunday as a nationwide air alert warned of possible missile attacks ahead of the war's 4th anniversary. 5 districts were hit while sirens sounded across the country. The violence spread to Lviv near the Polish border, where a policewoman was killed and 14 others wounded in what the mayor called an act of terrorism. Diplomatic talks are also moving. US envoy Steve Witkoff said proposals are being drawn up that could lead to a meeting between Putin and Zelensky.
We're hopeful, Jared and I, that we've put some proposals on the table to both sides that will bring them together in the next 3 weeks and maybe even result in a summit between Zelensky and President Putin. Might end up being a trilateral at some point with the president. We'll have to see. I think he doesn't want to come to a meeting unless he feels that he can consummate this thing and get the best result. And he uniquely has that power to do it. So hopefully you'll be hearing some good news in the coming weeks.
Zelensky says any talks must deliver a fair peace, highlighting gains on Ukraine's southern front.
Russia keeps pushing for a quick peace deal that includes a withdrawal from Donbass, which fits their idea of regaining control there quickly and without further casualties. But you can't say that we are losing the war. We are definitely not losing. The real question is whether we will win. That's what remains uncertain, and it comes at very high cost. That's why we suggest the following approach: keep the current positions as they are.
Cross-border attacks continued. 1 person was killed in Russia's Volgograd region by a Ukrainian drone. Moscow shot down at least 7 drones, temporarily affecting airports. With violence rising and talks underway, the war hangs between escalation and a fragile chance for peace.
Authorities in Zaporizhia and Luhansk reported Ukrainian strikes on energy infrastructure and oil depots. In Zaporizhia, Russian officials said Sunday the region is facing recurrent power outages after major damage to energy facilities. In Luhansk, a Ukrainian drone attack set a fuel tank on fire, at an oil depot. Russia is drawing a red line in the Baltics. The Kremlin warns it will activate its nuclear deterrent if any weapons are deployed on Estonian territory aimed at Moscow. Presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov insists that Russia poses no threat to Estonia or the region, but says that changes if Estonia or Estonian soil becomes a launchpad for nuclear arms aimed at Russia.
Estonia is very close to us and we don't threaten it, just like any other European country. However, if there are nuclear weapons on Estonian territory aimed at us, our nuclear weapons will be aimed at Estonian territory. Russia will always do what it must to ensure its own security.
Hungary threatened to veto the EU's 20th round of sanctions on Russia unless Russian oil shipments through Ukraine resume. Foreign Minister Peter Sayarto said Sunday that Budapest will block any measures serving Ukrainian interests if Kiev does not restart oil flows, critical to Hungary's economy.
Ukraine cannot expect our support in Brussels by blocking essential energy supplies to our homes and factories. My first duty is to protect Hungarian citizens, and I will not allow any decision that weakens our economic strength. For cooperation on strategic files and sanctions packages to continue, restrictions on Russian oil shipments to Hungary must be lifted first. Without that, we will use our veto to block any move that ignores Hungary's security.
All the way to Sudan now, the UN is asking for $1.6 billion for the millions of Sudanese uprooted by war. The 2026 Regional Refugee Response Plan aims to reach nearly 6 million displaced people across 7 countries neighboring Sudan. That includes life-saving aid for those already there and for nearly 500,000 more expected to cross the border. Many are stuck in border zones with next to nothing.
Severe funding cuts have forced UNHCR to close 2 of its 3 registration centers, impacting people's access to essential protection services. The widening gap between growing needs and dwindling resources threatens to undermine emergency response efforts and medium-term solutions. We need $1.6 billion to support millions of Sudanese refugees.
The UN Refugee Agency Regional Director for East and Southern Africa said Sudan remains the world's largest displacement crisis and its worst humanitarian emergency, worsened by a severe funding gap.
Sudan remains the world's largest displacement crisis and worst humanitarian crisis, developing in the wake of the most severe global funding crisis in decades. Thousands of people continue to flee across borders every week. They often arrive in areas that were already fragile but generous, where public services and economic opportunities were limited even before the crisis. While host governments and local communities continue to show remarkable solidarity, the capacity is being pushed to the brink of collapse.
In Sudan still, nearly 3 years of war have upended daily life. Many families now break their fast with a single meal from local soup kitchens. Kermis Farouk has more.
For the 3rd year in a row, many families across Sudan are observing the holy month of Ramadan under the shadow of war that turned once fertile land into battlegrounds. Here in Omdurman, mothers, children and elderly residents gathered around this local charity kitchen, hoping to secure a simple iftar meal. For many, a modest plate of rice will be the only meal they have after a long day of fasting.
I was one of the people who didn't leave during the war. We stayed and never left Karawi district. The charity kitchen really helped a lot. Sometimes they offer a breakfast, other times they give lunch, and thank God. People are staying patient and accepting what they have. Thank God for everything.
Alongside the meals served on site, volunteers in other areas of the city distribute bags of dates and essential supplies to families in need. They do what they can to help residents through the month.
They play a great role to lift the suffering from the people here. They really play a big role here. They offer a meal and sometimes they give 2 meals. That's on the regular days. Now in Ramadan, for 4 p.m. everyone gathers here as they provide iftar meals.
While many residents elsewhere are celebrating Ramadan in normalcy, Sudan is trying to hold on to the spirit of the month despite the overwhelming hardship. According to the UN, the conflict, which started on April 2023, triggered the world's largest humanitarian crisis, with famine declared in several parts of the country.
The European Commission is holding intensive talks with the EU member states to draft or to craft a coordinated response to growing US trade pressures. Brussels confirmed it has a full legal toolkit to respond, including activating the anti-coercion mechanism. Officials also signaled a possible revival for a previously suspended countermeasure plan targeting over 90 billion euros in US goods.
We are in constant and intensive discussions with member states to develop a unified and firm response. We have a wide range of tools at our disposal that allow us to respond proportionately. If this approach continues, we will not hesitate to use anti-coercion measures, including export restrictions and tariffs on services. We could also exclude American companies from participating in public procurement tenders within EU member states. We have a countermeasures package ready to be deployed. It targets US goods worth more than 90 billion euros.
Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva rejected drawing his country into a new Cold War, urging US President Donald Trump to treat all nations equally. Speaking at the AI summit in India, Lula da Silva stressed the need for peace over instability, saying direct dialogue is essential to maintain stable relations between the America's two major powers.
So, my agenda with Trump is a long one. It's an agenda where, on my part, I'm going to discuss trade, I'm going to discuss university partnerships, I'm going to discuss the Brazilian population living in the United States. But I want to discuss above all an issue, including American investment in Brazil, which has long ceased to exist.
India's Commerce Ministry has postponed a planned trade delegation visit to Washington, initially aimed at reviving the impact of the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling on Trump-era tariffs. Reuters reported the delay was mutual, with no new date set. Talks are expected to cut U.S. tariffs on Indian exports from 25% to 18% in exchange for Indian importing $500 billion in U.S. goods over 5 years. Indonesia and the United States signed a new trade deal cutting U.S. tariffs on Indonesian goods from 32% to 19% with exemptions for key exports. The Indonesian economy minister called it a win-win, noting Indonesian textiles could face zero tariffs under a developing quota system based on U.S. materials like cotton and synthetics.
This agreement comes after a difficult start to 2026 with a 19% rate comparable to US deals with Indonesia's Southeast Asian competitors, Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand and the Philippines. While Vietnam has a slightly higher 20% rate, if Indonesia can frame some commitments to the US multilaterally and use them to ease regulatory restrictions, it will boost consumer confidence, which should be fully leveraged and developed.
It is time to catch up on more international news stories in the News in Brief, compiled to us with Salman Asseb and Sofian Kanturi.
Argus Consulting expects Algeria's liquefied petroleum gas exports to rise to 6.3 million tons over the next 2 years. The British firm forecasts Algeria's LPG production will peak at around 10 million tons by 2029, increasing exportable surplus as domestic consumption accounts for only about 20% of total output.
More than 1,000 people rallied Saturday evening in Paris demanding justice for Mauritanian national Al-Hassan Diarra, who died over a month ago while in police custody. Demonstrators carried out a large banner directly accusing French police of responsibility for his death, calling for accountability and justice.
The United States Secret Service said on Sunday that its agent shot and killed a man in his 20s. According to Reuters, the shooting occurred after the man allegedly attempted to breach a security perimeter at Mar-a-Lago, the resort owned by Donald Trump in West Palm Beach.
The Algerian Consul General in Lille, Mohamed Zourhan, hosted a collective iftar in honor of members of the Algerian community. The event was attended by representatives from Nigeria and Mauritania in a Ramadan atmosphere marked by solidarity and fraternity. The gathering aimed to strengthen community ties and reaffirm Algeria's deep-rooted relations with its African partners in a spirit of mutual respect.
And that's the end of our news program. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great night.